utilizing that so that they can thus push their political agenda and spin people into hysteria. Well, speaking of climate change and hysteria, we are finally now going to be joined by our guest, Lord Christopher Monckton. I'm hearing that he is ready to go and on the line. Hello, Christopher Monckton.
Hello, very good to hear you. I'm glad we've at last connected. I've been waiting on the line, would you believe, for the last half hour, very nearly.
Oh, my goodness.
So there's a problem in your control room, I fear. Anyway,
oh, no.
How can I help with this wretched hurricane?
Well, Lord Monckton, I know that you have been a voice out there amongst this this climate change hysteria, and you've been one of those dissenting voices that has really had a lot of really good points. I know you've been part of research projects where you guys have talked about in depth how they're over-exaggerating their climate science to kind of fit their political agendas. Can you tell us about that?
Let's start with the hurricane, because we're being told by the usual suspects that this hurricane has definitely been made worse by global warming. It's caused by global warming. It's unprecedented. It's never happened on this scale before. Never has there been such a strong hurricane. Every single one of those statements is simply a lie. And it's a lie peddled by what I call the climate communists. These are people whose real hatred is of capitalism, and they are willing, for the sake of advancing communism or fascism, whichever it is this week, they are willing to sacrifice the lives of those who are in harm's way by trying to distract attention away from the rescue effort and onto trying to blame capitalism for storms like this, which happen every so often. The remarkable thing about Hurricanes Harvey and Irma was that until they came along with Jose just behind them, and I'll tell you why there were three of them in succession in a moment, until they came along, there had been no landfalling Category 3 or above serious hurricane anywhere on the Atlantic seaboard of the United States for 12 years, since Hurricane Wilma. 12 years. Now, that's the longest period without a Category 3 or above hurricane striking the American Atlantic seaboard since the records were first kept 150 years ago.
Well, the 12 years kind of goes right in with the solar cycles that are supposedly 11-year cycles. So that's kind of interesting that you said that it's been 12 years.
Well, there's more to it than that. If we mention the sun, there have recently been three very strong X-class flares, solar flares. And Piers Corbyn of Weather Action, whom I've just been talking to about this, says that he's noticed there's a very clear link between these very big solar flares that happen from time to time. These are huge outbursts of energy from the sun. And the sudden heating up of the problem actually is in the eastern Atlantic, where these storms form if the weather gets warm enough for them to form there. And solar flares help that to happen. Because, of course, at this time of year, once the storm gets across to the western Atlantic into the Caribbean, there the water is going to be the water that everybody goes to the Caribbean for. It's warm. It's 30 degrees Celsius, 100 Fahrenheit, whatever, and that's enough to feed a storm and turn it into a hurricane. So these are natural events. And let's just look at some of the Lulus that have happened before. Galveston in Texas in 1900, between 8 and 12,000 people were killed in the storm and the floods that happened then. That was probably the worst natural disaster in United States history. So if anyone tells you that Hurricane Irma is a 1 in 500 year hurricane, which is another lie that the left are peddling at the moment, that too is not true, because the Galveston hurricane showed that these things were happening long before global warming caused by us could possibly have been fairly blamed. There was the Labor Day storm in Florida in 1935.
Exactly. Can you believe that you actually have hysterical climate change enthusiasts out there thinking that this is a direct result of President Trump having removed some of his climate regulations?
This is how far the climate communists are from reality now. They are desperate, and I'll tell you why in a moment. They are desperate. But first of all, Hurricane Mitch in 1998 killed 11,000 people in Central America. Fifi Arlene, 1974, 8,000 people. And then Flora, 1963, 7,000 people. And at the moment, the combined total from Harvey and Irma is likely to be around 100. So we're not looking at unprecedented death rates. We are looking at an unprecedented number of people now living in Hurricane Alley, living in harm's way. Florida was left by the Native Americans more or less alone because they knew hurricanes came in and devastated it every few years. And it's only we arrogant Westerners building these huge tower blocks and things right in the line of fire that causes the kind of damage it causes. But even then, there has been a steady decline throughout the last century in the amount of money lost through damage caused by storms. That's partly because buildings tend to be built these days hurricane-proof. Private houses, not so much, but bigger hotels and so forth. They're built to take it. And so gradually we are learning that if we want to live in Hurricane Alley, we must build so that things don't fall down every time you get a big storm.
Well, you know, the Florida Keys
on the list I've just read out, you're going to get them every 12 years or so.
Exactly. And the Florida Keys, the location of it, I mean, it's essentially just a patch of sand really in the ocean, and to think that it's not going to be hit and devastated by hurricanes is ridiculous. And the fact that you could even have tsunamis.
It's more or less in the central Caribbean, and the Caribbean basin, which therefore confines the sea, and it's quite close to the tropics, so you get a lot of sun. That's going to be warm water, and it's warm water combined with cooler air above, paradoxically, that makes these storms spin. It's the differential in temperatures between the warm water below that has to be at least 26 Celsius. And that cooler air above, and it's that differential that causes the storms to spin up to the magnitudes we're seeing now. But this is nothing new. It's nothing exceptional. It's nothing whatever to do with man-made global warming, because the global temperatures have risen over the last 150 years by about 1 Celsius degree. Now, that's simply not enough in the order of things to make a vast difference. And, of course, there are many benefits to the extra CO2 in the atmosphere, not the least of which is that the mass of green plants on Earth and trees, despite all the deforestation we hear about, has actually increased by between 15 and, according to a latest report, 50% over the last 60 years. So what you're getting always from the far-out left, who are now increasingly out of touch with reality, is this complete nonsense. They will just lie. Every time a big weather event comes along now, they'll immediately say this is unprecedented, never been seen anything like this before, never have we recorded anything like this in recorded history. Actually, we have. It's been seen time and time and
exactly.
time again.
It's been documented time and time again. We've seen this happen over and over. There's images as proof.
They're getting really desperate. They're getting really desperate because they know of the research that you and I talked of when I was with you in Montana at that great conference earlier this year. And that research has now come to its fruition. We are now just about to hear back from the peer reviewers at a learned journal. And so far, nobody has been able to find a hole in our argument. We can prove that the amount of global warming that will happen per doubling of CO2 concentration cannot exceed 1.5 Celsius degrees if you correct the mistakes we have found in the climate models and assume that in everything else they've got it right. 1.5 Celsius, which is their minimum, now becomes the maximum, and that's simply not enough.
And let's show some images of the hurricane while we're talking about this stuff, guys. Just because really and truly the devastation that we're seeing here, as Lord Christopher Monckton is telling us, it is devastating. It's horrible. We won't see many things like this in our lifetime necessarily, but our lifetimes are relatively short. And when you look at history...
I'm not saying that. I'm saying this will happen roughly every 12 years.
Oh, okay.
These big storms have happened roughly every 12 years throughout the last century. There's nothing new about it at all. And the only thing that's new about this one is that there was a complete gap of 12 years during which there were no land-forming Atlantic hurricanes in the United States. And that's the longest period since records began 150 years ago. So we are not talking of an unprecedented, terrible hurricane. We're talking of an unprecedented period of calm, 12 years of it, before these hurricanes that are now coming in. So, if anything, what is beginning to happen is that as the world gets just that little bit warmer, the temperature differentials, which are the things that really drive hurricanes, are beginning to diminish. And therefore, one would expect perhaps to see slightly fewer of them than we have in the past, not more. And this is where, your average climate communist doesn't know any of the real underlying science. And the important thing, the important driver in all this is still the sun. We've had these 3 massive X-class flares coming out of a sunspot region on the sun just over the last week. That's the kind of thing that has been shown in the past, with Piers Corbyn's done a lot of work on this, has been shown in the past to cause hurricanes. And Dr. Klotzbach, who has analyzed Hurricane Irma, done a detailed study, and has found absolutely nothing unprecedented or unusual about it at all. Now, that is no comfort to those who are being killed by it and whose homes are having their roofs torn off and their windows smashed in. Every hurricane of this magnitude is going to do a lot of damage where it makes landfall. And the United States, unfortunately, a large part of your Atlantic seaboard is in Hurricane Alley. And the lesson, I think, to learn from this is, first of all, one should pay absolutely no attention to those malicious climate communists who are willing to exploit the misery of those who are suffering in these storms. And I get very angry when I hear these people playing politics with the lives of Floridians, the lives of people in Texas, in Houston, and I get very tired of them saying if only Houston had had complex communist zoning laws like the rest of the country, then it wouldn't have suffered from the floods so badly. Yes, it would. It would have suffered just as badly, but it would also have been trillions of dollars down because of the cost of paying for the socialist regulation that Texas alone has been sensible enough not to inflict upon itself. So we've got to expect or try to require the climate communists to grow up, stop trying to preach to us about how every passing extreme weather event is unique, or even to try and they've been trying to preach to us that these extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. The answer is actually no, they're not. And their own climate communist organization, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is entirely, and nobody elects that, it's an entirely appointed communist body, they themselves have had to admit, not once but twice, in their special report on extreme weather scenarios in 2012 and in 2013 in the 5th assessment report on the climate, of which I was an expert reviewer, they were compelled to say, because we made them say it, that there is no real evidence that a little bit of warmer weather is going to increase, rather than in fact decrease, the incidence of extreme weather. And the big question you can always ask to the climate communists is this. Okay, so you say the science is settled. Tell us then, what is the ideal global mean surface temperature? And if they can't tell you that, then how can they tell you that a 1 degree increase in global surface temperature over the next century is somehow going to, because that's all we're going to get, is somehow going to be bad for the planet? The answer is, if they can't even say what the ideal surface temperature of the planet is, then they can't say that any amount of warming is going to be a bad thing. And they have never yet answered that question. So everything they say is cant. It is directed towards trying to damage, at the moment, the Trump administration, because Donald Trump has decided very courageously, and he was put under more pressure on this than on anything else by the enemies of reason and of capitalism. But he stood firm because he remembers that the working people of the United States, the people in the coal industry in West Virginia, they, for instance, they don't want to be told by the climate communists that they've been killing the planet, because they haven't. It isn't true. And when you see these wretches deciding that they are going to exploit the misery of everyone who suffers with every passing extreme weather event, so as to try to blame capitalism for that extreme weather, when they know perfectly well that these extreme weather events have been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and that there's nothing at all special about the number, or the frequency, or the intensity, or the duration, or the size of any of these events, then this is despicable, it is outrageous, and everyone who is a red-blooded American, should rise up against these climate communists. And I think we've now we've got to start sending some of these people to jail. We've got to
Exactly. They need to be put in prison. These climate communists are no better than the people out there looting right now, and the businesses price gouging, and the people that are just going out there making things worse and capitalizing off, like you said, this tragedy, other people's misery. And, you know, these climate pushers are not going to let a tragedy go to waste. They are definitely going to take advantage of the fact that people are in a state of panic and fear, reasonably so, to thus generate hysteria so that more people go out and watch Al Gore's movie, so to speak.
Here's a simple question that you can ask to any climate communist that rings in and says, oh, you know, that's just Moncton, and we all know he's paid by the fossil fuel industry. Actually, I'm not. My check from ExxonMobil didn't arrive last month, or any month. But here's what I think you can say to them. They, or the climate communists, say that the natural greenhouse effect is 32 Kelvin. They say that the pre-industrial temperature was 287 Kelvin. That means that the maximum feedback fraction on the mad assumption, the extreme assumption that all of the greenhouse effect was caused by feedback and not even by CO2 at all, that gives you a feedback fraction of 32 over 287, which is 0.11. It's about 1/9. Now, their minimum estimate of the feedback fraction is 0.23, which is double the absolute maximum it could possibly or impossibly be. And that's how we know that they've got this wrong, that they've screwed up. And they know we know, and they're wriggling like stuck pigs. I was in Moscow 10 days ago giving the results and talking to some of the members of the Russian Academy of Sciences about it. And you can see that they are beginning to realize that you know, they've had communism, they don't want it again. So when all the climate communists turned up in Moscow 10 days ago, I went along, and the climate communists were not given the usual sort of adulation that they meet everywhere else in the world, because Russia's been there, done that, had communism, got the T-shirt, doesn't want it. And so academician after academician was standing up and saying this has been exaggerated, the uncertainties are bigger than they say, and it's not sensible for Russia yet to sign the Paris Accord because the science is most certainly not settled. And of course, when they heard my result, they're absolutely fascinated. They're working on it now. And country by country, gradually, they're beginning to look at what we're doing. They're beginning to find that it's right. And they're beginning to find, therefore, that we are able to prove that for 120 years, of order 100% of all scientific papers written on how much warming we're going to get have exaggerated, and exaggerated by typically somewhere between a factor of 3 and a factor of 10. That's how bad the exaggerations have been. And those days are now drawing to a close. Our paper is eventually going to be published.
That's right. And you know, they're just doing this so that they can push their agendas. And, you know, a lot of people have realized by now that the Green Party is really essentially a front for the Communist Party.
That's right.
That's why a lot of people call it the Watermelon Party, because it's green on the outside, red on the inside. But, you know, it's kind of interesting here that you also have people saying that, you know, although it looks like communism and parts of it and elements are, it also is tying in a technocracy where you have these scientists and technocrats wanting to dictate policy in the name of science.
Course, is fascism. And what you've got is the communists will always try to call the fascist extreme right. In fact, both the communists and the fascists are extreme left. You know, the Hitler's party was the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, and it was the first party to promote the environmentalist agenda. And why? As a means of controlling the people. And that's what totalitarianism is all about. It's about absolute control over the totality of everybody's life, down to the last light bulb flickering because it's filled with poisonous mercury rather than a proper Edison lamp that you can actually read by. And this is what climate communism is. It's actually becoming fascism. And
yes,
this fascist elite of climate extremists who are now now about once a week somebody goes public and says that I should be executed, if you please, for daring to do scientific research that shows these people are wrong.
Of course, you know, they want to essentially stone and flog the people who have dissenting voices against communism. Essentially, anyone who is a Trump supporter, they're labeled a Nazi, and they justify physical violence and force against them. So because, you know, maybe I've seen you, Lord Monckton, wear your Make America Great hat again. So in some of these people's minds, you are this horrible Nazi, and it's just the hysteria that the mainstream media has perpetuated. We all know that that's not true.
Mainstream media are now fascist. That's what they really are, not so much communist as fascist. These are people who think that there should be a governing class of huge corporate leaders, these billionaire socialists or communists or fascists, call them what you will, who have bought into this global warming thing because it's a way of they and their mates getting control over everybody else's lives and everybody else's businesses. That's classic fascism. That's what it is. And so what we're dealing with is both climate communism and climate fascism. The extreme left, the two wings of the extreme left, if you like, have always been communism and fascism, and you'll find them united now in support of this climate nonsense, which is now on the verge of collapsing altogether, because as soon as our paper finally appears, and if the present journal doesn't get on with it, because it's a week late coming back with the peer reviews, then we are going to go outside the climate field, because the error that's been made is an error of mathematics that climatology borrowed from somewhere else. And we are going to go to a journal of control theory, explain in great detail how the climatologists do it and how they get this control theory wrong, and then ask for comments from the control theory community about the competing methods, the method that we would suggest, which is in line with existing control theory, and the method that climatologists have been using since 120 years ago, when they didn't do it right, and they never have done it right. And it's rather interesting that they insist that there's this consensus in climate science. What it turns out is that this consensus in climate science is at odds with a much wider consensus in mainstream science in control theory. And climate science is out of line with not just the consensus, but the proven results of control theory. Because, see, in control theory, which governs how feedbacks work, you can build an electronic circuit to measure it. That's what we did. We used one of our government laboratories to do it. I can't tell you which one. They'd never forgive me for being known
okay.
as the laboratory.
Yes, don't give us anything that's confidential or secret. You know, don't give us anything like that. But, you know, Lord Monckton, you have really filled in a lot of the blanks here. You've really got the information out here to our viewers to let them, allow them to really and truly see through the lies that the mainstream media is perpetuating and that these climate change enthusiasts are perpetuating. Well, you know, this is probably going to wrap up our interview here, Lord Monckton. But if you want to just make one quick closing statement and tell us where people can find more of your information and go follow you.
Right. The best place to go is whatsupwiththat.com. WATTS upwiththat.com, or one word.com, because that's the biggest climate change site in the world. It is a healthily but sensibly skeptical site. It doesn't say there's no such thing as a greenhouse effect. Yes, there is. What it does do is give you the straightforward science without the fascist or communist twisting you will get in the mainstream so-called, or the Marxstream media, as I call them. The time has come for ordinary working people to stand together with your president, who has spoken for them and continues to speak for them, against the fascist communist governing class, the Washington swamp, which he is so busy draining. And
exactly.
let us see these people off. And I hope that by the end of this year, there will be gales of laughter worldwide as everyone finally realizes just how wrong these climate communists and thermo-fascists actually were. They've been wrong from the start, and we are on the verge now of proving it absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Lord Christopher Monckton, for joining us. That has been amazing. I know that you have opened my eyes to some awesome things here. And, you know, more truly, guys, right now, with what Lord Monckton has said and how these storms are normal, they're part of cycles, you can expect more to happen, and how they come in 11 to 12-year cycles. That's why it's so important to make sure that you have preparedness items, that you have storable foods and water, so that when next time this a storm of this magnitude comes along where you're at, especially if you're along the coastal areas, you'll be ready and you won't have to necessarily be fighting with people as hysteria and panic sets in at the stores. So remember to get, we have 50% off of our Infowars Select Survival Foods. These are so important, guys. The stores completely sold out and their shelves were absolutely just cleared following the hysteria and the panic that the mainstream media started talking about with Hurricane Irma. And we saw the same thing with Harvey and with gasoline as well. So make sure you stock up on those survival foods right here. Well, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we're going to be back with Debbie Bacigalupi, who is a well-known speaker on Agenda 21.
I like to do things where I know I can at least take control of it myself personally. And this isn't a pitch for water filtration, but we go out and find the very best gravity-fed water filters where it takes out all the garbage but doesn't take out the good minerals, and then I put my drinking water through that. And if I'm lazy, I've got reverse osmosis, which really cleans the water but cuts out the minerals. So over time is probably not too good for you to only drink reverse osmosis. That's in all the studies. But the other big area is the shampoo and the sunscreens and the cosmetics and the body washes and the soap, which isn't really soap. So we had spent, and this is a plug, but it's really informational until the bottom of the hour when Sheriff Arpaio joins us. We spent years saying we want to get an organic, high-quality line of toiletries and personal care products so that I can use them in my own home and know from the manufacturer it's really what they say. And, folks, we got Mark Gonzalez, the owner of Nature's Brands, one of the biggest organic brands in the country, one of the top sellers at Whole Foods. Everybody recognizes our labeling because he's so nice. He even let us use basically his labeling, but change the name to Emrich's Essentials. So whether you get it at Whole Foods under his name or from us, what's best about it is it's on the low end of cost, but better than a lot of the other so-called organic brands, and is so respected. But I wanted to get him on because he's the expert. He's got a bunch of the brands there of what's in some of the other leading brands and some of the other supposed natural brands that really aren't organic. But Emrich's Essentials is Nature's Brands.
We're under a chemical assault. It's unbelievable to me what we've allowed to take place. We've got 84,000 chemicals now in play, 13,000 of which are used in our cosmetics and personal care items. And we use these things every single day. Yet about 10% have ever been tested. So we always rely on the chemical company to be able to be considered innocent until we end up proving them guilty. Does that make any sense at all? So all these things that we put on our body, they're going into our bloodstream. It takes about 28 seconds to go into our bloodstream. So here's what we've got. We've got the FDA that says, hey, you know what? For external use only. Think about this. Think about this. They say it's for external use only. They're not stupid at the FDA. They know it goes into your bloodstream.
What is the establishment going to do when all this comes out? It's already come out about bisphenol A and atrazine, and then they're still putting it in stuff. What's going to happen to them? Why are they doing it when I've looked it up? They've got chemicals that are even less expensive that they could be using that have less problems. It's like they go out of their way to do this.
I think that companies today, are they purposely trying to kill us? I don't know if I'm going to go quite that far, but what I will say is they don't seem to care if they do. They don't seem to
exactly. Just like Bayer with the hemophiliac factor 8, they knew it was in there, and they said, you know what? We'll lose money. Go ahead and ship these millions of dosages. They just didn't care.
Exactly. Hey, Ford, that as a young person was Ford with the Pinto, right? Oh, yeah, well, yeah, we have 30 gas tanks that'll blow up. Yeah, we'll get sued for millions and millions of dollars, but hey, at the end of the day, that's a heck of a lot cheaper than having to replace all those gas tanks in a recall. I mean, golly, we got a business to protect. Again, when you place a person's well-being at the bottom rung of the ladder and you place purely profit at the top, that is something seriously wrong.
Well, we're really impressed. Mark, thank you so much. Nature'sBrands.com. Folks can get their Emrich's Essentials, private labeled by you. God bless you. At InfoWarsStore.com, InfoWarsLive.com, or 888-253-3139. Mark Gonzalez, thank you so much, sir.
All right, welcome back. I'm Millie Weaver here, and I will be taking you guys through this broadcast, this historical broadcast of Hurricane Irma. Well, we are going to be joined here by Debbie Bacigalupi, who is a well-sought-after speaker on Agenda 21, and basically the agenda that these climate change enthusiasts have, and people out there like Al Gore that are trying to use this agenda, this climate change agenda, in order to thus promote their political agenda and take over control of our natural resources. So Debbie, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Millie. Thank you for having me.
Hello, Debbie. So how are you, Debbie? Can you give us a little bit of a rundown with Agenda 21?
Sure. Well, Agenda 21 is the agenda for the 21st century. And as you just mentioned, Millie, it is to, control and take control of all of our natural resources and really push us into what you mentioned earlier when you were speaking with Lord Christopher Monckton, into what we call a technocracy, a scientific dictatorship, which is why we hear all the time now, the science is settled. Don't worry your pretty little heads. We've got the science settled. Climate change is real. Global warming is real. And it's because of you, mankind, that we are seeing all these climate crises, these catastrophes. And therefore, under Agenda 21, sustainable development, we all must, change our lifestyles to live a sustainable lifestyle, walking, biking, taking public transportation, living in a resilient city in order to combat global warming, and which would then therefore save planet Earth from all of these hurricanes and these droughts and these floods and the extreme cooling and the extreme heating and anything under the sun.
Exactly. So, we've seen how technocracy plays a big role here with what we're seeing. Because I know I was talking with you early about how basically this environmental movement, this green energy movement, is communism. And then you kind of brought it to my attention that actually it has more to do with technocracy. Can you kind of explain the difference there to us?
Sure. Technocracy is more about using systems to bring us all together. Think about like a smart grid, for example, and how the big goal is to connect all of us either by our smartphones or our smart grid, our smart wells, our smart water, all of the above. Technocracy is that there are elitists who think that only the skilled, only the elite should be ruling, and that it's less about jobs, it's more about taking all of the environment's resources and pushing us into a cashless society, for example, as an example, into a new international economic order. It's about bringing us under one. It's less about one person dictating how we live our lives, which is much about communism. There are people who think that communism is more like there are a group of people who think we are lesser than. Technocracy is not like that. Technocracy is more of taking technology, manipulating science, and creating a system where we're all one. And you could think of we're one big happy family is their ultimate goal. Technocrats want to control every aspect of our lives, which is exactly what Agenda 21 is all about. If I could take a moment, Millie, to read from...
Yeah, sure. While you're looking for that, I just want to interject here that, we heard, Bill Nye, the science guy, talking about how, science should dictate policy and not politicians. And that's exactly along the lines of technocrats and technocracy.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is we are now starting to hear mainstream media talk about technocrats, which is quite interesting because I think that they always have their pulse on what's coming up for us next as they plan our future. And we're starting to hear more and more on technocrats and technocracy. A friend of mine who recently died, his name is Dr. Istvan Marko. He is a friend of Christopher Monckton's as well as Dr. Willie Soon. And we all gathered together in Paris at the Paris Agreement in 2015. And I interviewed Dr. Istvan Marko. and bless his soul. And what he said to me about technocrats, he's from, Dr. Marco was from Belgium, another, extraordinary chemist and scientist who knows that the science is never settled. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a study.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at this right here, and right now there is an eye wall and a storm surge going on with Hurricane Irma in the Key West right now. And it is pretty alarming to see the flooding and that storm surge coming in there. So we have that actively happening right now, and I hope people are not in harm's way. But, we've also seen how the Florida government came out and they enacted curfews and mandatory evacuation orders, and they were able to prevent companies from doing price gouges. And I guess in that sense, them enacting a form of martial law, it was actually helpful and in some ways benefited people, but in other ways it didn't, because as Leanne was saying, people who didn't get out in time, they were stuck there because of the curfew, and they didn't want to go to jail for breaking that curfew. But I wanted to kind of ask you, Debbie, what's your opinion on how the government can utilize these states of emergency, and if they're able to announce or declare somehow that climate change is an ever-increasing problem, how could they then abuse that with an Agenda 21 goal in mind?
Never let a crisis go to waste. I think they use these crises to abuse. And what are they abusing? Individual freedom, where you were just talking about control. And we will see, as a result of this hurricane, no matter how it turns out, no matter how much destruction or little destruction it causes based on their predictions, we will see policy put in place in order to create a resilient city, which is a sustainable development city, which is a United Nations Agenda 21 sustainable development city, which is something that Al Gore has been promoting since the first Rio Earth Summit in 1992, which he was a delegate. And then in 1993, he became vice president with Bill Clinton, where they created Executive Order 12852, which is the President's Council on Sustainable Development. They've had in mind since probably before 1992 what our future would look like. And that's where I'll just tap into this book, Millie, really quickly, to describe to people in their own words, in Al Gore's and the...
Sure. Yeah, you go ahead and get right into that. And as far as like resilient cities, Debbie, that, it sounds innocent for the most part, because when you think about resilient, are they going to be resilient against storm surges or against hurricanes? But, you were kind of explaining to me how actually it's a lot more sinister, and I'm hoping that you'll touch into that.
Sure. Okay, so what is Agenda 21? Well, according to them, effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. Here's the sentence that just grabs me every time. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human. Now blaming all of these hurricanes on human beings, on us driving cars, on, my parents being cattle ranchers and supposedly cattle, because they burp and they fart.
Yeah, they're blaming it on cow farts. I mean, it's that ridiculous. They're actually saying, you breathe too much, or you have cattle that pass gas, and that's the real cause of climate change. It couldn't be the sun, couldn't be the solar cycles. I mean, it's that ridiculous.
They rarely mention something called Pacific Decadal Oscillation either. And that is the natural volcanoes and phenomena that happens in our oceans, where the oceans do warm at times. And that's why we see a lot of migration of, salmon, for example. And salmon are being used to abuse and control, private property, individualism, freedom and liberty, and to put in these massive comprehensive plans, these blanket one-size-fits-all plans, not only just across, for example, my state of California, which, we have a cap and trade program. We also have the largest dam destruction project in worldwide history based on junk science, in a state that needs more water and needs water storage. We're destroying our water infrastructure. But you know what? It's all about control. And Here's what they say at that sentence, the one that grabs me. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action. We're breathing right now. We're using technology right now. Those are human actions. Be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. This is why they will use these crises to the extreme, to force, to manipulate, to use unelected, self-appointed bureaucracies to make more laws, more rules, more regulations like your curfews, although sometimes they're really good. Like a curfew is great if there's danger involved. But afterwards, we're going to be experiencing, I just think.
Well, the problem with the idea of creating a state of emergency in the name of man-made climate change, because they can drag that out and have that be an ever, continuous thing where we're constantly in a state of emergency because we're constantly having this supposed man-made CO2 and these climate change levels.
Yes, and you just heard from both Dr. Willie Soon and Lord Monckton that there's minimal effect from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There's minimal effect. In fact, we've seen plants need carbon dioxide. We need carbon dioxide. And when people say to me, cars, their emissions cause so much damage. Drive along a forested road, like to Lake Tahoe, for example, on a very busy Highway 80. And if that analogy was true, I would think that we would see dead trees along the road all the time. We used to see dead trees. Because
if it was true, then I would think that we would see Al Gore and Leonardo DiCaprio not flying around in
let me know when it's ready to play and I'll stop. But what I was asking him about was his 10-year predictions, which his 10-year predictions were that there would be sea rise and there would be catastrophic death. And because if human beings don't live a sustainable lifestyle, if we don't move towards this sustainability movement that Al Gore has been pushing since the first Rio Earth Summit, Agenda 21, if we don't move in that direction, we are just going to destroy the planet. We're going to destroy Mother Earth.
Right. That's exactly how they control you. They use fear tactics, hysteria. They generate hysteria. And that's how they really get people on board and panicking enough to go along with this. And it's sad that they're doing it to school-aged children as well as adults. But, Debbie, thank you so much for joining us here. I know we had to cut our interview a little bit short just because we had a little bit of technical difficulties with getting Monckton on and so on and so forth. But, thank you so much for that. And it really you're brave to really go out there. Debbie is so brave to go out there and confront Al Gore and these guys out there, these big globalist guys who are out there perpetuating this hysteria, this climate change hysteria, that we all need to surrender our freedoms, surrender our liberties in the name of man-made climate change. And hopefully many with you right now, and we had people like to you how climate change is greatly being exaggerated when it comes to man's influence. Well, Alex Jones is going to be coming up right now, guys, so stay tuned.
I've got a very simple sales strategy. It's develop and sell products that I personally use for my family at affordable prices, because I want you to get great results, and I want you to come back and keep buying the product, because I follow the golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. Now, we have developed True Whey protein for one of the top developers in the country and private labeled it at an affordable price that is delicious. I put the whey in, and ours is the best for the price it is. It's high quality, with either strawberry or chocolate flavored bone broth that has obviously incredible benefits. And you mix this together and you put in some organic milk, you put in some strawberries, some blueberries, some cherries. It's amazing. And I've gotten spoiled to this. I'm going to be honest with you. In the last 6 months as we developed this product and I was testing it, the energy it gives me, the meal replacement, all of it has spoiled me. And you can add fruit to it if you want. You can add ice to it if you want. But the True Whey protein with the caveman formula together is simply incredible. And it's something that supports our broadcast, so you can't lose. But I want people to experience what concentrated bone broth does with chaga, mushroom, and with the turmeric, and with the bee pollen, and then with the high quality whey together. It's amazing. This is a true superfood. Of the 30 plus products we put out that are all great, this one is the most amazing. When it just comes to, I take this for breakfast. I'm not hungry till like 6, 7 at night, and I have so much energy. But it spoiled me because I used to work out to not be overweight. Now, this has changed my whole life. Bone broth is so amazing. Mixed with high quality whey, it's even more incredible. Mixed with some berries and some high quality organic milk, it's delicious. It's all available at InfoWarsStore.com. And you can't lose because you're supporting the broadcast. Thank you all for your support. Find out why Caveman and our True Whey is so game-changing at InfoWarsStore.com.
Every morning before I start writing or shooting a video, I take 2 capsules of Brain Force for a sustainable burst of energy. This is, without question, the most powerful nootropic I've ever taken, and it comes without any of the crashes or the jitters associated with energy drinks. It's additive-free, nothing artificial. It's Brain Force Plus. Read thousands of 5-star independent reviews right now and get your Brain Force Plus at InfoWarsLife.com.
Did you know that you can now preserve your own food for up to 25 years and still maintain its nutrition and flavor? That's right. Now's the time to build your own food storage with Harvest Right's freeze dryers. Go to InfoWarsStore.com to learn more and check out this innovative and smart technology that's easy to use. And let me tell you something, it is perfect for freeze drying fruits, vegetables, meats, dairy products, desserts, and entire meals. Woo, that's what I'm talking about. And when compared to traditional...
The globalist great error is to believe that as they collapse humanity, they end up on top. The truth is, humanity is coming down fast, but we're miles above them on our journey to hell.
You're listening to The Alex Jones Show.
First, the Eastern Caribbean, then Cuba, now Naples, Florida, Marcos Island have been wrecked as the storm has come on the edge of the shore at a Category 3 and is pushing a huge storm surge up towards Tampa, set to hit there with its full intensity in the next 6 hours, but already causing 4- and 5-foot storm surge in. But it is not a biblical megastorm like it was 5-6 days ago out in the eastern Caribbean, where it would take prosperous islands with large concrete hotel structures and flatten them, making islands uninhabitable, like Barbados and others. So we're going to be tracking all of this today as it unfolds, but a strong hurricane slamming in to southern western Florida. But it's covering the entire state and is set more and more to go westerly. In fact, some paths have it going ahead after it hits Tampa, bouncing out to sea and could go up towards the Panhandle, Louisiana, Mississippi, or even Texas. But most tracks show it going up the western side, up into Georgia, up into the Carolinas. Here's the problem. The tracks that they had going back 2 weeks ago, a week ago, 3 days ago, 2 days ago, none of them were right. The tracks always showed it going out in the Atlantic or up the East Coast, and then the last few days going up the center of the state. And then now they show it going westerly, but staying along the westerly side, with some now saying, oh, maybe it's going to track out to sea. With my experience with Katrina and so many others, it sits out in the eastern Atlantic, heats up, comes in, runs along the bottom of Florida. Katrina sat there for like 3 days, just spinning off the coast, and then zipped on over, as we all witnessed. But this gives us a unique opportunity, while the public is paying attention to weather, to point out a couple big things. We have the UN, we have Al Gore, we have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we have Obama and all the folks that are invested in the carbon tax swindle, the big Hollywood folks as well, George Clooney's, saying it's your fault this happened. Even though back in the time of Christopher Columbus, they reported on storms in the Caribbean and storms in the southern United States that would knock over every tree when they made landfall. I've not seen a storm that knocks down every tree. So we know about mega storms, sometimes that would go on for weeks. That would be, of course, 2 or 3 hurricanes or cyclones right behind each other, like we're seeing with Irma. And we've got Jose, and then we've got Tatia out in the western Caribbean spinning around. Tatia. I can't pronounce anything right. How do you say it? Katia with a K, thank you. I don't have a teleprompter, but they do occasionally pop in my ear when I'm getting something wrong. So that's always good. But hey, I'm pretty good to get all these hurricane names right without a teleprompter. It kind of trains you to be focused, but I'm not too good on my Russian names, even though I supposedly get my orders from Vladimir Putin. Now, getting serious, we have some amazing guests today. When I say amazing, there's been a lot of new big developments the last few years in the area of geoengineering, namely that planetary weather control projects have been admitted by governments. Russia, China, Dubai, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, even South American countries are admitting it. But they always make fun of it in our news, and that's because the United States leads it. So there's been some big new developments. One of the leading researchers on this, Dane Whittington, is going to be joining us in the second hour. Stan Deo, amazing earthquake expert, one of the best tracking records out there of being able to predict earthquakes. Going to get into why we saw the record earthquake a few days ago in Mexico, 8.1, 8.3, depending on the Richter scale report we see. That's the strongest ever recorded in Mexico. We're going to look at that and just talk about these huge developments dealing with the deep state and its deep projects. He trolled him. He baited him. He trolled him. He baited him. He trolled him. He baited him. I wish I was that smart. See, that's the Trump dimension. That's the Trump dimension. He trolled him. That's the Trump dimension. He baited. That's the Trump dimension. He trolled him. That's the Trump dimension. That's the Trump dimension. He trolled him. That's the Trump dimension. He baited. I wish I was that smart. See, that's the Trump dimension. It's Trump. The plan of Trump. And thus, by extension, Trump. Trump just trolled you. But that's okay. It's Trump. The plan of Trump. And thus, by extension, Trump. Plex.
We want your soul. We want your soul. We want your soul.
Defending the Republic from enemies, foreign and domestic. It's Alex Jones.
Tell us your habits, your facts, your fears. Give us your address, your shoe size, your years, your digits. Your
Dane
plans.
Wigington, just one of the best researchers out there. He's a scientist engineer into geoengineering and weather modification, is going to be joining us coming up in the second hour. Stan Deo is going to pop in at the bottom of the hour. One of the top, he's an engineer with many letters behind his name, but one of the top accurate predictors, lay predictors of earthquakes. We're going to be talking to him and looking at some of the latest models dealing with earthquakes and why the strongest earthquake in Mexican history, in the history of Mexico to be recorded, hit just a few days ago. And why are earthquakes and typhoons and hurricanes